Once there were two brothers. Once there were two brothers who farmed the same piece of land with a hill between of their homes. One brother's house was crowded with little feet and sticky fingers and laughter that made the windows rattle. The other's was quiet, peaceful, a little bit lonely, full of stories whispered at dusk. One summer, the fields were generous. The barns were full in both homes. The brother with children stared at his plenty and he thought, my brother has no one to help him harvest. I'll carry a sack of grain across that hill tonight. And he did. Under the moon, quiet, not wanting to embarrass him. At the same hour, the childless brother stared at his plenty and thought, my brother has so many mouths to feed. I'll carry a sack of grain across the hill tonight. And he did. Under the same moon, the same quiet, not wanting to embarrass him. They passed each other in the dark, twice blessed and unseen. In the morning, each was surprised to find his barn as full as before. And so they did it again and again and again. It's this story of kindness that I invite us to hold in our hearts as we enter the portal of Yom Kippur tonight. I never walk into this night without trembling. The room changes when the scrolls wear white. The air changes when the first low note of Kol Nidre finds us. Our vows soften, our spines soften, our defenses begin to soften. The melody itself is a kind of archaeology. It unearths grief had words for. On Kol Nidre, every year I ask myself the same honest question. Do I have anything worthy to say here? Not clever, but worthy. Worthy. I want to honor that hope. On Rosh Hashanah, we said this year, it depends on me and on you and on us, right? It's up to me. It's up to you. It's up to us. Aleinu. But who is this we that I and you belong to? Kol Nidre claims to speak for all of us, but who is the us? Who walks through these gates with us tonight? Who do we allow in, especially now, especially when belonging itself feels so fraught? Chutzpah, holy moxie, answers before we can. At the very threshold, before we even intone Kol Nidre's words, the leader I announced a wild permission. Anu matirin litpalel im avaryanim. We permit ourselves to pray with the transgressors. Friends, that's not a throwaway line. It is the very posture of the whole night. The circle is being widened at the door. Kol Nidre is not a ceremony for the righteous. It's a gathering of the accountable. And accountability requires community. It requires a we. But who is that we right now? Let me name the ache plainly. We are living in a time when the boundary lines feel electrified, where crossing them feels dangerous. Within the Jewish world, especially since 10/7, I hear two interlocking laments. Some of us say, if you love Israel, how can you speak about it in the way that you do? And some of us say, If you love justice, how can you not speak about it the way I do? Rage and grief live in both camps. Fear lives in both camps. Love lives in both camps. And trust is fraying. As Americans, we know the fracture all too well. We the people is increasingly reverting to we the people, but not those people. We build media ecosystems to inoculate ourselves from the shock of other people's facts. We speak more loudly and listen less tenderly. Fear is contagious. And some of us feel galvanized, some feel exiled, some feel exhausted, and many, if not most of us, feel all three of those. And we're not abstractly debating camps. We're trying to determine if we still share a common home, a common purpose, a common community. So if Kol Nidre says we, how do we build or rebuild that we? How do we sustain that we? How do we cultivate that we? What is the size of our tent, and what is the ethic of that tent? And is it naive to claim a tent at all? And so tonight I would like to offer two frames. One of them biblical and the other midrashic or rabbinic, and then a practice and a way to live this night into the dawn. The story of the golden calf is the origin story of Yom Kippur. How many of y'all knew that? The golden calf story in the book of Exodus is the story of Yom Kippur. After Mount Sinai, when Moses lingers on the mountain and the people panic, they melt their gold, they shape a calf, and they bow down to it. The greatest betrayal in Jewish history. Right after the wedding day of Mount Sinai, the covenant, the Jewish people stand below with the golden calf. And when Moshe comes down with the tablets in his hands, he throws them to the ground in rage, shatters them. Then climbs back up the mountain again a second time to plead for the people. And God says, in maybe not God's best moment, wipe them out, Moses, and start anew. I'll reboot with you. We can reboot the covenant, God says, with a much purer people, your people, pure. But Moses does something unbelievable. Moshe says, no way. If you erase them, then you can erase me too. If you erase them, I'm going there too. Moshe Rabbeinu ties his fate. Moses, our teacher, ties his fate to the fate of the Jewish people, not at their highest moment, but at their lowest one. And then on the 10th day of Tishrei, the day that we now call Yom Kippur, Moshe descends again. This time he has two sets of. And we hear God's voice saying, Salachti kidvarecha. I have forgiven you as you asked. That was the first Yom Kippur. Not a day of abstract atonement, but a day when forgiveness and not purity was chosen as the basis of our covenant. At the beginning of the service tonight, a part that we just read, we said those very stunning words of God's affirmation of unconditional forgiveness. Salachti kidvarecha, I forgive you. Moshe's insistence is not a sentimental plea for niceness. He doesn't say they didn't mean it or it wasn't so bad. He says, if you want me, you must want all of us. Covenant cannot mean the righteous only. Covenant must mean everyone. And guess what, friends? God agrees. God learns. And God says, I forgive you. God's forgiveness is not softness. God's forgiveness is the nature of relationship. And forgiveness is the glue of covenant. So say these words with me. Not purity, forgiveness, not exile, kindness. On Rosh Hashanah, we were introduced to the second frame. We met a rabbi, do you remember him? Elazar ben Dordia, a man who had wasted his life chasing pleasure. And when the truth finally broke over him, he cried out for the mountains, the heavens, the stars to help him, and they couldn't. And finally, he collapses, and he sobs, Eina davar talui el abi, the matter depends on me alone. And in that moment, a voice from heaven proclaimed, Rabbi Elazar ben Dordia is invited into the world to come. What did God offer him? Not perfection, not a do-over. God offered him forgiveness. But the story doesn't end there. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the greatest sage of his generation, heard what had happened, and he began to weep and said, there are those who acquire their world in many years, and then there are those who acquire it like in one moment. And from that day forward, Elazar was no longer just called Elazar, but they called him Rabbi Elazar. He was not a sinner, Elazar, but Rabbi Elazar. Because forgiveness is not only God's response, it's also the community's embrace. It's not just God forgiving, but the community embracing Elazar. Forgiveness means that even at the last breath, a person can be restored, renamed, or regathered into the we. Rabbi Elazar ben Dordia was not offered a do-over, he was offered a future. A voice from heaven didn't say, you were perfect, it said, you're forgiven. And that's how community breathes. That's the glue of community. But if forgiveness is the glue of community, kindness is the daily practice. If forgiveness is the glue of community, then kindness is the daily practice of community. Some of you might know this, but our sages, the rabbis, were really fond of the image of a tent. They like tents. They like tents. And often you might hear it said that Abraham was the one with the big tent. How many of you heard that? Abraham had the big tent. It's true. But there is a much earlier source that doesn't give Abraham the big tent. The first instance in rabbinic writings of someone who had a big tent was someone named Job. Have you heard of Job? My friend Dr. Yehuda Kurtzer asked, who was Job about whom the rabbis say he had an open house, an open tent? Job was someone who suffered immensely. If Job is the earliest representative of a big tent, the big tent was a Shiva tent. Someone who had lost everything, a man who needed comfort. His home was not a conference hall where ushers checked name tags. It's a Shiva house. To have a big tent is to make room and space for people to show up. And people show up because there is loss to hold, not a vote to win. The ethic isn't alignment, it's attendance. Kindness, Shiva, comfort. If we return to the story of the two brothers who over and over again climbed up the hill between their homes, they carried a bag of grain over and over again, imagining what the other man was suffering, what they had less of that they might help out. They wanted to offer nourishment. They wanted to be kind. Until on a night of a full moon, they met at the top of the hill, each bent a little by the weight, each startled at the sight of the other's gift. They dropped their sacks, and they embraced, and they wept. They wept the way that we weep when we realize that we have been loved in secret by someone. And God looked down and said, here is where you will build my temple. This hill will be where my temple, my house, is built. The temple was not sited where people were right. It was sited where people were kind. So if the first frame of we is forgiveness, Moshe insisting that we must hold sinners and doubters, the second frame is kindness. Job's tent reframes we as a house of care, and the brothers give selflessly to each other. Together they say, we do not erase our standards, we reorder them. In this tent, accountability is real, and it happens inside of relationship. We keep arguing policy, we keep guarding doors, and across that hill in the dark, we keep carrying grain to one another. We keep climbing with kindness in our hearts and hands. That hill is where God still builds houses. Not purity, forgiveness. Not exile, kindness. Those two brothers climbing a hill reminds me of another hill that we climbed. This one, a poem offered from another hilltop. Not long ago in Washington, D.C., on the steps of the U.S. Capitol after it had been desecrated by violence, where a young poet named Amanda Gorman stood and read her vision for America, and she called it The Hill We Climb. And in it she said, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, and characters of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. The brothers climbed the hill at night and closed that divide. And we are asked to climb a hill in daylight and close our divides. The brothers' gifts were great, and our gifts are courage. Because, friends, the temple was not built on purity. The temple was not built on who was right. The temple was built on kindness. On two brothers carrying sacks of grain in the night, on an embrace at the top of a hill, and on tears that turned into holiness. And friends, our temple, this world, our communities, our polity, our families, every arena of we-ness will not be built where people are right. We will not rebuild this country in the places where we are right. Our country will be built where people are kind, not where one brother wins the debate, but where both brothers refuse to let the other go without seeing him. The great Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai said it this way, from the place where we are right, flowers will never grow. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard, but doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. A whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. We build the house with kindness. Kol Nidre's we is not a virtue signal, it's a vow, it's a promise. It says, we're not going to do purity politics at the door tonight. We're going to do a Shiva presence. We're going to do accountability together. That's why our confessions are all in the plural. We sinned, we did this, ashamnu, bagadnu. Even when I did not personally do this thing, because communal repair requires communal speech. Because even when my hands are clean, my heart lives in a body whose fate is tied to yours. As Jews, after 10/7 and another year of shattering, Our we cannot be a raffle ticket you get for holding the correct view. Zionism, anti-Zionism, non-Zionism, critique, defense, grief, rage. We cannot excommunicate one another from the Shiva house, friends. We cannot excommunicate one another from Shiva homes. I'm not saying that our tents don't have poles. They do and they should. If anything, sharpening and clarifying what those poles are is essential to being able to do the work inside of the tent. And our broader community must be built on elasticity, not exclusivity. The bigger tent, the Jewish people's tent poles, are mercy and responsibility, forgiveness and kindness, not ideological perfection. We all must stand against dehumanization of Israelis who now walk around the world with a scarlet Z on their backs, of Palestinians, of political opponents, of strangers at our doors. We must insist that Jewish power be wielded with Jewish ethics, and we must also insist that Jewish vulnerability be understood in full, not caricatured to score points. And we must refuse the seductive power to alienate, exile, and sever the we in the process. If anybody follows along any of the great pundits, from my dear friend Dan Sinor or Chavi Retet Gur or any of those who have been speaking into this space for 2 years, one of the things we know is that the Jewish people in Israel are perceived to be so weak when we divide one another against one another. When we forget the greater we that we are. When we choose exclusivity over elasticity. When we choose vendetta over forgiveness. And we choose cruelty over kindness. As Americans, we, the people, cannot mean we, the like-minded. It just can't. If the only people you can emotionally tolerate are the people whose feeds that match yours, your we is a curated brand, not a covenant. Our democracy depends on a thicker we. Neighbors whose signs make you mutter, whose kids still carpool with yours. You can fight like blazes for what you believe, and please do, and still cross the hill, still bring the grain. Kindness risks discomfort to maintain community. Kindness doesn't mean don't protest, it means protest without exile. And we Jews should be proud because our covenantal we is the Jewish contribution to the American we. And so I'll say tonight from this pulpit, here at this great bastion of both Jewish and secular culture, if you show up to carry grief, to carry a bag up the hill for a sibling you believe is wrong, that's where God builds houses. If you show up to carry confusion, that's where God builds houses. If you show up to listen deeply, that's where God builds houses. If you show up with your doubt, that is where God builds a house. If you show up with your anger, that's where God builds a house. And if you show up simply to say, I'm here to stay, that is where God builds a house. Not purity, forgiveness. Not exile, kindness. So I want this to be more than poetry tonight. Kol Nidre is about promises, permissions, and practices. So here's an exercise for the next 25 hours that will give you a way to climb the hill. Choose one person that you have avoided this year. A family friend or a family member, a congregant, a colleague, because of their Israeli politics, or because of their American politics, or because of some other dividing line that makes it feel intolerable, and see them in your mind's eye And sometime between now and tomorrow night, whisper a blessing for them. It can be as raw as, may you be safe, may you be wise, may you feel loved. If you can't, send a short text after the holiday ends. I was thinking of you today, and I want to wish you a good year. No arguments. Just carry a bag of grain and climb up the hill. How about this? Practice Shiva house presence. You know what that is? If you're going to say something that might be heard as a withdrawal of belonging, like people like you don't belong, pause and ask yourself, am I about to police the door or am I widening the circle? You can speak hard truths. Just speak them from a chair inside the Shiva house and not a bouncer's stool. How about this one? Make one forgiveness move. Perhaps write a 2-line email to someone that you've hurt, or decide that you'll let go of one small resentment that's poisoning your spirit. Just know that it's not capitulation, it's called oxygen. The way that communities breathe is through forgiveness. Yom Kippur has given us this miracle statement from God, Salachti, I forgive you. And that line came only after a leader was willing to risk everything, to put everything on the line for his and her people. Moshe refused to be separated from the people, and that's our permission structure tonight. So forgive someone, put your name on the block, someone that you pushed out, and be like Mo, and refuse to leave someone behind. No Jew left behind. I want to go back to the brothers, okay? Yeah? Aren't you thinking about the brothers? I have a twin brother too. So this story touched me so deeply. And I started imagining like what their life looked ahead. The story really ended when they embraced on the hill. So I started wondering what happened to those brothers. And so I imagined them years later, older, carrying less weight, but still meeting under the moon. Maybe the arguments in the village had gotten much worse. Maybe one brother's kids went off to a yeshiva and the others to a commune. Maybe one became an anti-Zionist and the other one was in the army. Maybe one donated to one party and the other to another. Maybe one posted things that made the other fling his phone across the room. But at night, under that moon, they still walked. Under that moon, on that hill, they still walked together. The instinct to care for one another had become a rhythm. The habit of being compassionate had become for them a covenant. The world kept shouting at them, choose a side, and they kept choosing each other. That's not weak. That's holy. And somewhere in the fields nearby, I hear a Rabbi, Elazar. I hear his breath in the dust, saying, the matter depends on me. The matter depends on me. And somewhere above him, I hear a voice from heaven saying, Salachti, I forgive you. And somewhere between dust and heaven, I hear Kol Nidre and its stubborn preface, we permit ourselves to pray with all transgressors. When the liturgy feels old, borrow Moshe's sentence and say, if you erase them, erase me. When the comment threads feel like acid, borrow the Midrash's image, sit Shiva and don't score points. And when the arguments turn you to stone, borrow the brothers' feet and walk across the hill together in the dark. I was going to end my sermon here. And then I got a text this afternoon from my dear friend in Jerusalem. And I asked him, I said, Rabbi, I said to Mish, Rabbi Mish, what are you going to say to your community in Jerusalem tonight? He said, I'm not giving a sermon. I'm going to sing a poem to them. And I said, what poem? And he sent me a poem by the actor in Israel, Shuli Rand. Those of you who might know him, he was in Shtisel. Oh, yeah, Shtisel. These are the words that just broke my heart completely. And with them, I want to bless all of you. Da b'ni ahuvi, know my son. Know my beloved son. Ki milibi lo nekarta olam. That you will never be uprooted from my heart. Ata li yeled chen ben shashuim. To me, he said, you are a son forever to me, a child of grace, a son of delight. The words say, others will say about you, they'll say you were ripped from my heart. Others will say that you are banished forever from my table. They will whisper secrets that you buried to me until your body shivers with shame. They will point to your every mistake, your folly, your leaning toward darkness, and they will sigh, it was yours to choose, and now the road back is gone. And you will listen to them, and you will believe them. They will insist that mercy has a border, a line your restless feet have crossed. No cry, no sigh, no clever plea will turn my face again toward you, my son. And they will speak of a voice from heaven that says, return all of you wayward children except for him. And they will hold you up like a snared butterfly, fluttering now for their delight. And says, Shuli, do not listen. Do not believe them. No, my beloved son, you were never torn from my heart. Forever you are to me a child of grace, a son of delight. Yes, their words hold shards of truth. There is sin to confess, paths you might have chosen differently, courage you never found, and still, my beloved son, cast far from your heart the terrors of fear and despair. Beneath every wounding truth lies hidden a truer truth. Do not listen. Do not believe them. No, my beloved son, my beloved child, you could never be torn from my heart. It is true that I love justice, but more than that, I love mercy. Not purity, but forgiveness. Not exile, but kindness. Those are the two stones that will build God's temple. On the top of that hill where brothers meet and choose one another over and over again. Where mother, father, son, daughter, Jew, American, where all of us agree to carry grain and to hold one another. May God look on us this Yom Kippur. May God look upon us, the stumbling but firm, and grace us to be able to forgive, to be able to find kindness. And may all of us be sealed for life, for courage, and for the kind of kindness that rebuilds temples. Please rise.